And you're very welcome to the RTÉ Rugby Podcast after Ireland fall to France at the Aviva. 2 defeats now from 2 games played in the Six Nations and second from bottom in the table. Delighted to say we have Donal, Lenihan, Bernard Jackman and Liddy here to talk us through. Gents, you're welcome as always. Look, I suppose, Donal, if I was to extract the main points from the game against France, it was Ireland, fought for large parts of the game. They probably did very well to get within 2 points of France in the end, but ultimately the same problems with attack, some leaking problems in defence, and despite an improved line-out, I don't know how many positives there were to take from the performance. Am I being overly critical again?
I don't think so. No, you haven't got into your stride yet, Hugh. We're only in the first minute of this. We'll give you a chance to warm up. Look, when you look at the scoreboard, Ireland defeated by 2 points. The game is in the red and they have an opportunity to win the game, be it from a penalty or a drop goal, which when you look at the game in isolation, you say absolutely brilliant. But look, the reality is, I think we were haunted to be in that position. There was a moment in the game, particularly from the third quarter, when France looked as if they could really pull away. I mean, had they scored that try a minute into the second half, really, Dupont shows that he's human after all. I mean, he had 3 French players lining up in the most gaping hole, a metre from the Irish line, and he picks Willems, who's about 6'10", and he hits him on top of the head. Had they scored at that stage, I think it could have been got really ugly. On the flip side of that, Ronan Kelleher's try really was a freak score. I mean, came out of absolutely nothing. But look, you've got to acknowledge all the attributes that are there with each and every Irish team, like that resilience, that like when you look at the amount of players that were missing, I reckon probably missing a minimum of 7, if not 8, from what would be your first choice starting side. So in the context of that, huge amount of positives. But again, I think something that Birch will know from his playing days, sometimes in the build-up to a game, when every day it gets worse. So you find out on Tuesday, Jay Ryan is gone. You know Peter O'Mahony is gone. You get to Wednesday, and there is a strong possibility Johnny Sexton won't be playing. Then you go for the captain's run, you go on the run on the Friday, and Conor Murray tweaks his hamstring. So you go into the team room, you come out afterwards, and the rumours start circulating, oh, geez, Conor Murray is now gone. That forms a resilience and an understanding, this kind of a fear factor develops that if we're not absolutely filleted here. So I'm not surprised at the response in terms of the performance, but I think the point you're alluding to is the same issues both in defence and attack that have been there for some time now, like we're still, they haven't been resolved to any great degree, and that is the worry.
And Bernard, it says a huge amount about this Ireland squad that even with a very stale, predictable attack that has had problems for the last few months that we've seen, and with problems in defence that you highlighted last night and against the Head, that they were able to get within 2 points. And I think it speaks volumes for the players' attitude. There's no issue with that, with their will to win and eke everything out of what they have within themselves to win a match. There's no issue with that, and that has never been under question. It's the other facets of the game that still remain below par. And I say to myself, God, imagine if we did have a more varied attack. Imagine if we did make opposition defences think a little bit more about what they're doing, what we would be capable of if we fixed those areas.
Yeah, and that's the challenge, and that's why it's frustrating. And my fear is that the players, I don't think the players have lost confidence yet, because, they could easily, I suppose, understand what happened in Wales, red cards, being in the game at the death. And against France, they'll say, well, look, we were 1 penalty kick away from winning it. But I think what will happen is the self-belief will start to erode, and confidence levels will drop. And, if we start to drop off in our efforts, suddenly the margin of defeat will be much greater. And in fairness to Farrell, you have to say he hasn't lost the group. The group are playing for the jersey, they're playing for him. There's huge effort in it. As pundits, I suppose what we have to ask is around the actual content, and I know unstructured attack is really sexy at the moment, but I was looking at some stats last night. I think 79% of scores in the first 2 rounds have come from structured attack, right? And you analyse our structured attack, it's very difficult to see what the plan is. Where they're actually spotting weaknesses in the French defence or our Welsh defence the week before and going after and attacking those. And if you don't get over the gain line in the two phases, it's given we're not the most powerful team in the world. We don't, and also we probably don't have players of the X factor of Jalibert or the footwork of Donal or Villiers. So we have to really get on the front foot from set piece. And as I said, I don't see any real plan. And even really good players like Gary Ringrose are starting to look average. And that's shocking, because Gary Ringrose is a class act. Gary Ringrose should be being talked about as being a 13 for a British and Irish line selection for a tour that probably won't go ahead. But, at the moment, I don't see him being in there because the way he's playing, it looks like he has no playmaking ability. And that's a player, as I said, who I think is world class. So that's a challenge that the coaches are going to have to find a solution to. And again, to go back to that first Welsh or French try, I mean, there's no doubt that they analysed that Ireland are soft on the inside defence, and it's brilliant by Marchand, etc. But like, he knows Jalibert is going to probably link back inside there, and Dupont follows up. And they sent 2 decoy runners to actually soften up that. So there's a training ground move that gave France 5 points at a time when, for the first 20 minutes, Ireland were completely dominant.
The last 2 rounds, right? Ireland have 54 carries per offload. 54 carries per offload, the most of any team. France, by contrast, have 9. Wales, who don't play particularly exciting rugby at the moment, have 19. Italy, 20. And so, there is a serious problem with what we're doing in attack. And today, I see a headline on one of the rugby websites saying Andy Farrell asked for more from the Irish backline. But what does that mean? He wants more.
More carries without offloads. I don't know. It's a very familiar narrative at this point, I suppose, in terms of there seems to be a lot of negativity in the kind of appraisal of games afterwards, but at the same time, it's not like we're being beaten out the gate, despite how poorly we seem to be playing in some facets, and that's what's so frustrating about it. Like, as Donal said, we lost by 2 points in a game where the bookies had us down to lose by 4. We lost by 2 with 5 or 6 of arguably our more influential players missing. Now, equally, France had just as many fellas missing as we did, which hasn't really been referenced if you look through. Yeah. Vakatawa, Raka, Thomas Ramos, all these guys into match. Yeah. So I suppose the frustrating thing is that the things that are going badly are so obvious to everyone and should appear so addressable. And as Donal said last week, which kind of becoming more and more apparent, like, there's just a complete inability to fix anything on the hoof, it seems. I mean, I text Birch last night asking him, can he remember, and I text Eddie O'Sullivan the same time asking them both, can they remember the last time an out half dropped back into a pocket to kick a Gary Owen? Eddie O'Sullivan told me he remembers Johnny Pearce doing it for Shannon in the Munster Senior Cup. But that's like, when Billy Burns did that in dead centre of the pitch on Sunday, I was kind of going, like, what? Like, Breeze Doolan was the man of the match and was punishing us constantly with his returns, and we just persisted kicking. Like, you look at the Scottish try against Wales where he dinked it over the top at the weekend, and like, in the 3rd minute, Jemison Gibson Park had a quick ball at the base of a ruck just outside the 22. Gary on again. Like, if your goal is to kick contestables up the wing all day, like, why would you pick Keith Earls on the wing to chase him? Like, obviously you're going to do it sometimes, but it doesn't seem like you're picking a player that suits your preferred strategy, or you're playing to the strengths of the player you picked when you pursue that. So there seems to be a lack of logic that permeates both selection and approach, and it's kind of been repeated over and over, and I think that's what's most frustrating.
And again, we saw that last night, Donal, on against the Head, the amount of times that Ireland just kicked the ball away and kicked the ball away to a French team who are well able to defend high balls and are actually very, very good at it. So it's not that the execution itself isn't great. Some of the execution wasn't great, but it's the idea behind it that just baffles me and baffles a lot of people because we're saying, why are we doing something that plays to the strengths of the opposition?
Yeah, well, look, the thing that sort of worries me is that surely, you spend so much time in camp these days, you prepare very specifically for the opposition that you're playing against. Again, I hate happening back to Joe Schmidt's time, but you often heard Irish players talking about in the 2 to 3 weeks they build up to a series of international games. They might have a period of work, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before a specific game, maybe against down the line, where they'd work on a certain element that they were going to introduce for that game. Then they'd revert on the week before the next match, which could be against Wales, let's say, for the specific nuances that they wanted to show against Wales. As far as I can see, we just unveiled the same thing against every opposition, regardless of their perceived strengths or weaknesses. And it was only last night or yesterday when we were looking at some of the analysis stuff that was done prior to Against the Head, and Eddie had done a piece on Ireland's kicking game. And when you looked at it, it struck me, looking at it, we never competed in the air. Say, for 9 out of every 10 kicks, and they were, as was pointed out, they weren't bad kicks, but we were leaving Donal or Penot, even the other winger, who's a very small guy. They were dominant in the air. Like, surely one of the things is you get up, you compete in the air, you get a hand on the ball, so at least you can tap it back to the support runners coming through. Yeah. And also, when you put up those couple of bombs early on and you see not only is the guy you're kicking to really competent in the air, but also, and we've seen England do this, Wales, where they put this kind of a protective trail runner in the way, so that impacts on your ability to compete for that ball. But yet we keep, to repeat the same madness all the time, you get what you deserve. And that's exactly what happened. I mean, Donal must have touched the ball more times in the opening 20 minutes of that game than he would in a whole Six Nations Championship playing against anyone else.
And to illustrate and to highlight your point further, I remember 2 or 3 times that Villiers and Donal under a high ball didn't even have to jump for the ball, Donal, because they were so sure it wasn't going to be contested.
So I mean, when you have possession, at least then you're in the strong position on the ground. Chances are there's way more chance that some of the Irish players coming in, they're going to go off their feet at that particular breakdown, or you're conceding possession. There's a chance that you're going to concede a penalty. They can slow things down, realign in the back line. They can look up and see exactly what they want to do. And again, in that sequence of analysis, for anyone who hasn't seen it, the variance in the French kicking from 9, from 10, was just, and from fullback, was brilliant. I mean, they found the grass. There were grubber kicks. There were spiral kicks. They're just a variety of their kicking had Ireland under pressure all the time. I mean, we played into their hands. We haven't learned from this. And at some stage, you've got to move on and just recognise, look, that strategy isn't working.
Birch, I know that we were, certainly Andy Farrell, when he took over the job and selected his coaching ticket, promised us that we would there would be a new attacking dimension to Ireland's play. And the man charged with that is Mike Catt. He is the attack coach. And the criticism, if we're saying on the one hand that the players are still playing for Andy Farrell and they still believe in Andy Farrell and what he's trying to do, fine, even if we can't see it. Is Andy Farrell being let down by his attack coach?
Yeah, look at just to go back to the craziness of the kicking strategy. So you might remember there was a scrum on the right hand side. I think it was our first scrum in attack position. We hit Earlsy up. Earlsy didn't have any intention to pass. He was just setting a target. He ran into Jalibert, and so it was obviously a pre-planned. We played one more phase with Ty Byrne, came off 9, and we put up a box kick from the middle of the field. So this was obviously set up to try and target Donal. And if you're coaching a schools team and this is your plan, you'll do up a little PowerPoint and you'll say, okay, the first phase is Earlsy carrying, who's going to clean that ruck? Then Ty Byrne, who's going to clean that ruck? And if your plan is on the third phase to kick it up to Donal, you'll also say who's going to actually contest in the air, and who's going to counter ruck if Donal catches it. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you look back on it, Andrew Porter was under the ball. Like our tight head prop was actually under the ball, and he didn't know what to do. And Donal just caught it with without even having to take a jump, or whatever. So there's an example of, and look, at potentially there was a plan. It's just everyone forgot their jobs, whatever. But it's just an example of things we need to tighten up on, because you won't beat France, you won't beat England, you won't beat Scotland just making it up as you go along. Going back to your attack, look, at the reality is we're not doing anything that's vastly different than the lads play in Munster, Ulster, Connacht, or Leinster. Everybody plays some form of a 3-3, 1-3-3-1 shape, or 1-3-2-2, etc. Like there's slight differences, but it's not anything that the lads haven't seen before. So yeah, we have to say it hasn't bedded in at all. Well, you know what I mean, and we're making a huge, putting a huge amount of effort in for very little punch. And you know, I would say the try against Keller, you could never plan that. That's a freak moment. And the try that Ringrose or the Henshaw scored last week is making as well. He just ducks back in underneath. Like there's no real plan there.
It's instinctive, right? Instinctive rugby.
Instinctive, yeah. And in fairness, like they will, like likes of Ringrose and Henshaw will cut back against the grain, and they're quick and powerful, and they will make some line breaks every now and again. But it's not really, you know, off the training ground. So there is question marks around it. And the last thing I'll say on this is that you can generally see a well-coached team by how comfortable their 10 looks. And Billy Burns looks like he's not an international quality player playing for Ireland. But having said that, playing for Ulster, he looks very comfortable and is far better accomplished. So I know it's harder because, you know, less time in camp and maybe he wasn't first choice for getting the reps. But the reality is, and Ross Byrne looked better, you know, coming off the bench. But Ross Byrne has looked poor for Ireland. Billy Burns looked poor for Ireland. Johnny Sexton has been good, but Johnny's probably strong enough character and experienced enough to set the team up how he wants. But outside of Johnny, you'd have to say that the other 10s look worse than they are, and I'd have to say probably not. That's to do with actually not having a really fluid attacking framework that they can just go in and implement.
And like, to be fair to Andy Farrell, Wes, you know, we knew this coming in here. The RFE knew this coming in here. His expertise on the coaching experience has been in defence for the Lions with England, under Joe Schmidt with Ireland as well. Defence is his remit, and also if you want to give it credit again in terms of the overall picture, there he is there to be the head coach, and he has imparted the attack part of his remit to Mike Catt, and ultimately you have to ask the question: is Mike Catt delivering for the job that he's been given? And on the basis of the performance that we see, not just in the last two games, but during the Autumn Nations Cup and again the last year's Six Nations, the answer is that Mike Catt is not delivering. So do we need to make a change there? Is that going to solve problems, do you think? I mean, you made a change for the forwards back. Look at the impact that Paul Connell's had in a very space of time.
Yeah, no, that's true about Paul. Like, it appears the line-out has functioned a lot better the last two games. I don't know. People do say attack is the longest to tweak, to improve. But to be honest, you could probably label the same at the defence at the minute. Like, I mean, the tries we've conceded the last 2 weeks have been, you know, it was highlighted again last night just in terms of, like, getting the wrong bodies in the wrong position. Like, I mean, the team has had just as little time as ours, yet look at the impact they've made. Now, you could argue that possibly, on average, the ceiling in terms of talent of these French players is higher than ours. Don't think anyone would really dispute that. But, like, it wasn't just talent that won it for him. You know, as the lads mentioned there, their kicking strategy was better thought out. It was better implemented. Their defence was better organised. And, of course, their attacking skills were on a different level. So, which, again, makes the mind kind of boggle. We only lost by 2 points. But, like, in one way, you go, 2020 was the first season. It was disrupted with COVID. They missed out on summer tours. Then, you know, like, there is legitimate excuses that they are still very new in the gig and they're not taking wallopings. They're losing narrowly, and there's plenty of scope for improvement. But equally, it's as close to the well, when exactly will this improvement happen? And I think from this point on, whether it's in terms of personnel or style, they need to start taking tangible things from games rather than kind of abstract notions of, we tried very hard, we're 2 points off, we were unlucky with someone sent off, etc., etc. So, for example, to go back to your favourite, Hugh, where to give you who've been ahead of the curve every week for the last number of weeks.
Sure. That's just me, Wes.
Is that the only reason you're now showing your face to the public as opposed to
Yeah, well, what does it say? A stop clock is right twice at least in one day.
Johnny's struggling to finish games or to put consecutive games together. That's not my opinion. That's a matter of fact. You can look at the stats. In an ideal world, Joey Carberry gets back fit and gets back to the form he's capable of, and he's pushing Johnny all the way. We can't rely on that with his injury profile. So absolutely, at a minimum, you need a third out half of that standard. For me, there's enough evidence at this point that either of the two guys in the squad aren't that guy in a long-term sense. So do you now skip forward to a Harry Byrne or an even bolder shout like a Crowley or something like that? And I know you said that you can't play them when they're not playing for their province, but at this point, you're not picking them for what they are. You're picking them for what they potentially be with the right exposure in 2 years' time. So at least if you do that, there's something tangible to point at where you say, okay, well, we've addressed this problem area for the team or attempted to address it, and perhaps it'll yield dividends.
Okay. Donal, this is the point I want to put to you. And I was listening to an interview with Andy Dunn recently, and he made this point, which I thought was very good. Is the priority for the IRFU and finishes high up the table, which we know financially brings an awful lot of money in, and every match that they win brings an awful lot of money to the coppers in the IRFU, which at the moment is more important than ever? Or is the priority to develop squads in 4-year cycles for the next World Cup? If it's the World Cup that they want to go and target, then clearly there's problems here. But if their priority actually is, Donal, and I understand if it might be this, financially we want to be secure, we want to keep the prevention, and that the best way to do that is the money that comes with the Six Nations every year, then so be it. But come out and say that, so we all have an understanding. We can say, right, forget the World Cup, it's the Six Nations that count every year.
Well, that is their strategy. I mean, it's the only thing. They've never come out and boldly stated that is their strategy. I think to be fair to a head coach, that needs to be put in the public domain. Right now, the problem is, like David Vora is director of rugby, so the one who formulates the strategy from the top, in line with, say, a number of people within the IRFU who would be prioritising the financial element of finishing as high up in the Six Nations as possible. Personally, I think, given that we have now found ourselves in a position where we've lost the opening 2 games, we have to take a longer term view. We have to support Farrell. And like you look at it, look at France. I think France, what they are doing is absolutely brilliant. From the point of view, since the last World Cup, which is now, say, only 15 months ago, this new management team only came in January of 2020. So they only had a couple of weeks in the lead into last season's Six Nations. But right from the outset, and everything you read about them is about the project. The project started in Nice when they brought in all these young fellas, and they outlined A, what was required of them, and B, that their long-term goal was to build a team capable of winning the World Cup for France in 2023. By doing that, you insulate the players, because you're going to say there's going to be bad days on the way. But, you know, this is a means to an end. Now, I think for the likes of Galtier and Ibanez, they couldn't believe they were so successful in the first year of the plan. They're now 2 out of 2 away games, remember, in this championship. England have facilitated them by losing against Scotland. So they're now in a brilliant position to actually, and I would say their goal this year is to win the championship, not a Grand Slam. They'd be quite happy to win it by, say, points differential in the end. But my point is, they have a short-term plan, which is developing younger players. 9 players, 18 and 19 World Cup under-20 squads have now been capped, including 3 props. So don't tell me that, you know, when we talk about youth, that's fine if you're talking about wingers, centres, out halves even. They have props, 3 props who've been capped at Six Nations level. So there is a plan there. Ireland, everything that we're doing seems to be short-termism. And I think that's unfair on a coach, because if he's handicapped in selection by a desire to get 4th place or 3rd place in the Six Nations as opposed to 2nd, then I think that hampers us in the long run. And we're falling in between two stools. So that goes back to my point. And Wes slagging me. Obviously, you wanted Harry Byrne thrown in against France to start at 10 last week. That wouldn't be right. Not fair for the young fella. He's not ready for that yet. But given that we lost those opening two games, I've certainly come around to the point of view that even if you bring and you start Johnny Sexton against France, he now has a mentorship role with Harry Byrne. I'd put Harry Byrne now on the bench against Italy in Rome in 2 weeks' time. Give him 20, 25 minutes at that level. I mean, we're going to beat Italy. So, expose the guy, bring him into camp and let him be part of that. Remember, Sexton was in there behind Antipome and Ronan O'Gara at international level when he was learning the ropes. O'Gara, 20 years ago, had to make his mistakes at AIL and provincial level with Munster. But when we finally threw him in against Scotland on that famous day, you had a comfort blanket with David Humphreys on the bench. I remember that day, like we ended up winning 44-22, but we were struggling in the early part of the second half. And I remember turning around to Gatland and Ronan was going through a difficult patch and saying, Gat, we have to make a change at 10. Now, I can't remember at what minute in the second half David Humphreys came on, but Humphreys was able to finish out that game, right? The following game was against Italy. So the easy decision, having won, was for us to start Rog again because it was Italy. So you got to feel your way through these selections. But I do feel the time is now right for Harry Byrne to be introduced. If Lancaster, for me, felt he was good enough to start in Heineken Cup against Northampton a couple of months ago, unfortunately cried off injured in the warm-up, well then I think his time has come and we've got to make long-term decisions now in those key areas.
And Birch, Andy Farrell has come out this morning and said, look, he was asked, are we going to see changes? Are we going to see somebody brought in? He said, we want to win the game. So we're here to win the game. That's all I care about.
And the squad, he's released guys back to get game time. Bundy Aki, Ulta Delan, Dave Heffernan, Ryan Baird, etc. are gone back. Ross Byrne has gone back. So it just depends on what they're going to do on Thursday, Friday. So if they're going to do a lot of stuff that's specific for Italy on Thursday, Friday, then the odds are that there'll be very few changes, and Johnny and Connor potentially would start against Italy, and I think that would be an opportunity lost. I agree with Donal. I think we should be able to beat Italy. I would say that Italy's attack is actually better now than it was, but anyway, it's actually starting to show some progress. But we will beat Italy. But I think Faz is very concerned. I think he'll be very focused on winning that game comfortably, building confidence for obviously a trip to Scotland. But I think an opportunity lost. And look, we haven't lost the first two games of a championship for 10 years. And potentially now is the time where Nucifora needs to, look after Faz to a certain extent and say, look, we are going to use these last three games to increase our depth. And Craig Casey was on the bench against.
Yeah, this drove me absolutely nuts, right? Why would you put Craig Casey on the bench if you're not going to use him? And Bernard, I go one step further. How substitute was brought on that game, most of whom got at least 20 minutes. And your man's left languishing there, 21 years of age. His parents all proud of him. Can't wait to see him. That says to me that Andy Farrell has no confidence in him. He's just there as a token guy to give him, for whatever reason.
You'd wonder if he had Kieran Marmy or John Cooney or Caelan Blade on the bench, would he have put him on? I think he would have. Some of Farrell's substitutions kind of surprised me a little bit. So the previous week in 14 men, he gave Gibson Park 8 minutes, and this week he gives him 82 minutes. The game, we were kind of chasing the game a little bit. I know we started to get back into it, but I thought he could have given Casey a run, and now Casey mightn't be involved against Italy and might miss his opportunity. So it's just not really joined up a lot of the thinking around it, and it's that substitutions. I mentioned, we put Sexton at 12 against Wales, which it didn't make sense. But even go back to the tactical stuff, Conway's probably one of the best players in the air. If we're going to go down that route, would you look to start him? It doesn't seem to be that we pick courses for courses. We align our tactics to the selection. It's just basically make it up as you go along.
And you're right about the Italian attack, but
sorry, Hugh, just on that, there's a part to me I can actually understand the Craig Casey one in that when you're chasing the game, and to be fair, I thought Gibson Park had a decent game.
Did you?
But, yeah, I did. Yeah, I think he kicked too much, but you see, he was doing things that he doesn't do with Leinster.
Yeah.
The same with James Lowe. I made the point in my piece on Monday morning. James Lowe has kicked the ball more times in 2 weeks than he did in the 3 years it took him to qualify on residency with Leinster. I mean, he's a totally different player in an Irish jersey than he is in a Leinster jersey. We got a glimpse of him, if you remember, his first cap against Wales in that Nations Cup. He was electric. He was everywhere. He was coming off his wing. He was supporting fellas on the inside shoulders, coming up the middle of the field. His work rate, all that is gone. He's covering the backfield. No, he's a fantastic left leg. His kicking game has been brilliant. But really, is that what you're picking him for? But sorry, I go to, and again, look, I do understand it's different when you're pulling the strings on the sideline. And I go back again to that Scotland game. Peter Stringer was on the bench against England in the week prior to his first game against Scotland when we eventually brought in all those young fellas. No, it was slightly different in that England were way stronger than we were at the time. They were hammering us. It was 50 points to 20. And we just felt that wasn't the arena to throw Stringer into. We did feel that we'd start him against Scotland the following week. And he did, and he did what he was selected for. I do feel like I would keep Craig Casey, for example, on the bench against Italy, and I wouldn't have any inhibitions about throwing him in the last 20 minutes in that game. It's because, as I say, at some you've got to make a decision with the future in mind. So look, to a degree, I could understand it, but when you're sitting on a bench these days, 8 fellas start there, and 7 of them are gone, and you're sitting there, and as you say, you have everything about you. That opening day, all you want is that first cut. It is difficult. I mean, but it'll be way more difficult if he finds with Conor Murray back that Gibson Park. Yeah. I mean, do you sacrifice him from, like, you obviously disagree with me, but I thought he a reasonly good game.
Well, I thought his kicking game was...
throw him out of the match. But that's obviously, but he's playing to instruction with that.
Yeah, but sorry, I actually don't think he had a bad game, but at all. But I don't think his skill set or Billy Byrne's skill set are set up to play that high kicking game that we played. So effectively, that's what I'm saying. Like, and also,
I agree with that, but I'm saying to scapegoat him.
Yeah. No, absolutely not. No, and I think
isn't picking Peter O'Mahony at 7 the same thing again, though, Bert? Another example of the selection and the strategy not aligning, and then Peter cries off injured, and you push him back to 6, and the whole benefit of having a bigger back row is gone. It's like there's no logic in the selection sometimes.
Well, look, we went into a match against France. We were underdogs. A proven goal kicker. Someone does a goal kick for his club. We went in with 2 halfbacks that don't play together. Like, there's a lot of things you could have easily went Gibson Park, Ross Byrne, right, and at least you have a goal kicker, and you have a 10 who's probably more suited to a kicking game. For me, Billy Burns, while he's got a lovely array of attacking kicks, his strength is playing instinctively on the line, high tempo. 9 and 10. Who thrive in kind of playing ball in hand, high tempo. And we said to them, the game plan is kick.
Well, that's exactly what Wes is talking about there. And if you're going to
Ross Byrne, you can go with anyone. Jack Carty,
John Cooney, surely to God, if you're going to employ that game plan and ask Gibson Park to kick the ball as much as he did, the best kicking scrum half is up in Ulster, not near the squad. Makes no sense to me.
Yeah, that's just another example of just things that maybe makes, and look, the coaches know more about it than we do, but it's just things that as pundits we have to say that it's questionable.
There's obviously a reason. There's obviously a reason why they're not picking Johnny Cooney in terms of there's something whether people talk about his defence or whatever. So that's almost a kind of, they've decided for whatever reason not to include him. But you look from the 41st minute.
He was called into the squad.
Well, for injury cover, yeah. I mean, which You know,
Yeah.
But if you look, from the 41st minute onwards, when Billy Burns went off, Keith Earls was the only non-Leinster back there. So you'd 6 of a Leinster backline in the 7, but they played a completely different type of game than the way Leinster would go about it. And obviously, look, you're looking at a whole systems change in the middle of a game. But you did have, like, you Gibson Park, Ross Byrne, Robbie Henshaw, Ringrose, James Lowe, and Hugo Keenan, like, comfortable playing with each other, but obviously knowing each other inside out. But you know, there was no appreciable change in the way that we played.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at James Lowe and the point you mentioned there, Donal, about the way he's playing now versus and how good he is with Leinster. And his tackle technique is almost as good as mine. I mean, you know, I don't know whether this has just been because Leinster have been so dominant week in, week out in the Pro 14, or even most of the time in Europe until they come up against like a Saracens, that we don't see James Lowe's defensive flaws. But oh my God, it was jaw-dropping stuff. 2 tries against Wales, one where he made a completely wrong read, the other where he missed a tackle, and then against France at the weekend as well, he just completely fell off a tackle. And how have we not seen this before?
I think we knew there was a couple of doubts that might be exposed defensively.
Not to that extent, though.
Level, and also he's very good at leading with his elbow on that near try that no one mentioned in the middle of the video review as well. But
yeah,
I just want to go back to something Donal said a minute ago, like where he said that this plan for France, this project started in Nice when all these younger players were brought in to first work with the management. I would argue this project for France started long before that, when the nucleus of these 2 under-20 World Cup winning teams were being brought together. And I would argue, I don't know this, but there seems to be very clear parallels between what France are attempting to do now in rugby with the goal of winning a home World Cup as to what the French soccer team did building towards the 1998 World Cup, where, you know, they established Clairefontaine as their training base in soccer, Reed Marcoussis in rugby for that. The team started to be composed of guys from, let's call them, non-traditional backgrounds in soccer. That was Henry and Zidane, and kind of fellas reflective of these waves of immigrants that have come into France. You're seeing a lot of that in rugby now too. The coaching staff is very much a product of a long-term succession plan. And again, I'd imagine Laporte has played a significant part in all of this. And there's an element of speculation here, but there is a joined-up thinking that's very, very clear to see permeate just the playing and coaching staff, but the entire organisation and the infrastructure around it. Now, this in the country that are the most chaotic thinkers in world rugby by a mile, traditionally. In Ireland, we have 4 teams and a whole structure where they're all feeding into one team, and where, let's be honest, one person has a huge amount of control over what happens. And yet we can't get aligned on this same basis at all. And, you know, it's a bit coincidental, but you're not going to be aligned and organised and logical in what you're doing with your first team if that logic and organisation isn't prevalent right throughout the wider organisation. So, I mean, like, I think the IRFU get a lot of credit over the years, like, and rightly so, and they've steered the ship very well at times, but like they're steady, sensible decision makers. And at times maybe there's a need for just one slightly bolder strategist.
It's a nice handy question for you there, Mannix. Take it away.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. No, it is a strategy that's been going on for a while, but it's like every strategy, there's a huge amount of luck involved in it. Like, to be fair, you're rightly praising the French for the way they've got about this, but I would argue, what were they in the previous 11 years? They made a complete and utter bollocks of their organisation with their international team. The players have always been there in France, but they brought in coaches like Guy Novès and Brunel, who were kind of beyond their sell-by date, you know, way past their most instinctive and best as coaches. So France wasted generations of great players, in my view. So, yes, I think Laporte, who, let's be fair, was the last great French coach. They won several Grand Slams under him. They had comparatively successful World Cups under him. But I think the strategy started with him, but they did waste a decade. But they also got lucky, remember, in that they wanted to bring in a head coach. It was either Gatland or Joe Schmidt were their original targets to be the head coach of this particular group until the French amateur and professional clubs voted that they didn't want a foreign head coach. No, Galtier was, I think, hugely, man management, question marks over him as a tactical coach and thinker, recognized as one of the best in France. But they got the perfect combination. A former captain in Rafael Ibanez, somebody who went away, won Heineken Cups with Wasps. So he has that outside experience. He was also a head coach in Bordeaux. Then I would imagine under Ibanez had a major input to the fact that for bringing in Sean Edwards. So they ended up more by accident than design in getting the coaching group that they wanted. But look, every plan, there's an element of luck in it. But look, I agree with you 100%. There are times when the RFU have to review and rethink their strategy. We touched on one of them last week in terms of younger players going abroad to get more game time with a view to bringing them back. The policy of only picking Irish players had worked brilliantly for a long time. But now we're producing too many players for our system. So therefore, you have to tweak your strategy. Every plan needs to be reviewed, particularly when it's at its most successful. Because what happens is it gets stale, things move on. And I think we have arrived at that point in time, both in terms of the view that we expressed last week with the younger players, but also now in terms of backing the coach to maybe expose more younger players to Six Nations action.
Yeah, and we're at a critical stage, Bernard, here, because we're not hitting any of the marks, like the marks of success in the Six Nations versus long-term planning for a World Cup. We're falling between two stools here. It's neither one thing or the other. If Andy Farrell is the man and he's going to be backed from the RFU, and look, there are some signs that he should be the guy and maybe tweak the coaching team around that, one of which he's done already with big results, then, maybe the RFU need to just give him all the help that he needs. And if that help means making a couple of hard decisions within his ranks, then they have to support him.
Yeah, and I'm sure they will. I mean, Nucifora would have to, I presume at some stage he has to go in front of the RFU and answer questions around performance as well. I mean, they've given him the power to, in fairness, he's had an open checkbook. I think he's been able to do a huge amount. And, obviously the success or lack of success of the World Cup was a hammer blow because, that's every 4 years we get a reality check there, which is part of our strategic strategy. The other one, I think, and Donal would know better than me, I think we're supposed to win 2 Six Nations in between World Cups as well, or something like that. So, and to be in top 2 or 3 in the world. So yeah, obviously we're not hitting those markers, and David and Nucifora will have to take responsibility for it rather than maybe just blaming Faz. I think Nucifora put this coaching staff together, and that was his responsibility. I think Joe Schmidt covered up a lot of cracks in our system. I think his ability as a coach, covered up inefficiencies, and I agree with Donal. France did get around for 10 years, but fair play to them. They seem to be on the right track now. And if we don't get our act together, maybe we're going to have 4 or 5 years of mediocrity, if we're not careful. So it's probably a time to take stock and to look at what we can do better in our game. And I agree with Donal, the time to do it is when you're on top. We were in 2018. We've probably slipped off the cliff a little bit without being like, it's not disastrous, but we're here to talk about getting Irish rugby. I think there is probably elements that we need to look at, and if Farrell and the coach staff isn't where it needs to be, and maybe it is, maybe we're going to see big improvements over the next 3 games and go into the summer in a better place. At the moment, there's questions around our attack and D, and it sounds, people say, oh, that's all the game. It's not. Like, our set piece is actually starting to motor. That's the third part of the game, but around our attack and defense, there is question marks that we're going to have to find solutions. All
right, gentlemen, I never thought I'd be saying this, but I'm very much looking forward to Leinster away to the Dragons in the Pro 14 this weekend. There's a little respite from our problems in the Six Nations. We'll be back next week to preview the Italy game. Again, I don't know what team we're going to see, but certainly it's a game that Andy Farrell has said, as of today, we're in this to go and win it. I'm not interested in experimenting. So look, we'll talk about it next week. My thanks to Donal, to Bernard and to Wes for their company. And we'll talk to you next week.